there was an 18-year-old in Indiana who was arrested because she, they, them, I'm not really sure, had been planning an attack on a high school for over a year. So the student is identified as Trinity Shockley, facing multiple charges of conspiracy to commit murder and intimidation. According to this report, sorry, my thing is freezing, I won't scroll. The student had identified as transgender and had gone by the name Jamie, which I find kind of interesting. And it was, unlike a lot of tragic things happen in America, this was someone who was identified. Apparently, someone called into a tip line for the FBI, and that was how this person was known. The person was also making posts on Reddit. Did you guys follow this story at all?
I just heard about it.
Which one? There's like dozens of them.
This one specifically, the Valentine's Day one in Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these, and there seems to be a trend that's a little bit concerning, to say the least here. As you know, the fact that it was stopped, I think, does signal that there is a larger shift in leadership in Washington, D.C. Because previously, there's a lot of documented facts out there and incidences where the FBI goaded and pushed and propelled and helped people execute a lot of these types of larger attacks here. And, we've got to be careful because we're on YouTube. I can't say exactly what I want here. But the fact that this was stopped does signal that, oh man, there could be actually someone competent in our national security state now that actually is doing their job.
Yeah. That's
the big revelation from all of this. Not that it's happening, because it's happening a lot, and there's been so many of these incidences lately, specifically with they, them, and schools, which is tragic, which is horrible. But the best way to kind of deal with this situation is not to name these people, not to show their face, not to make them infamous, but to kind of focus and more concentrate on the victims here. As I think the corporate media does a good job spurring these on and making them happen more.
And in this case, I mean, there were no victims because it was stopped ahead of time. It seems like this is a case for the FBI doing a good job, which unfortunately, a lot of people have lost confidence in the FBI. This person, Shockley, apparently sent messages on Discord talking about planning it, specifically referencing the Parkland shooting, and had some kind of infatuation with Nicholas Cruz, who ultimately got life in prison for his attack on that school. Gothix, what's your take on this? Is this something that's being sort of fetishized by students, or are we just more aware of it so there's more reporting on it?
I think I think it's a little bit of both. I'm just going to be blunt. People will say like this is a mental health problem and try to draw the correlation of like, okay, all of these school shootings so happen to be done by a particular they, them ideology. You could argue that it's like a mental health, maybe people on antidepressants. But I honestly just bring this back to, I think this is just what happens when society walks away from God. You don't have objective morals. You don't understand the concept of like human rights, because there's a reason why a lot of people in this trans ideology seem to think that their existence is on the line, like their trans rights are about to get taken away. So in their mind, they could justify something like this. But I mean, it really just comes back to like a warped worldview that people have when you abandon God, and this is what you get. And I hate it because now people are going to use this story as justification for more gun legislation, which is silly because the problem isn't guns. It's just people who don't see the value in human life.
Right. And I think there's a certain level of desire for attention. I mean, this person is not like Ted Kaczynski, who was anonymous in his cabin in the woods writing his dissertation on his thoughts on the world, using social media. Apparently the student had talked to a guidance counselor at the school and specifically expressed interest in Nicholas Cruz and things like that. There seems to be some sort of emptiness to this, and the solution unfortunately was to fetishize violence against their classmates. Do you think that we'll see this story? So this story is interesting, obviously, because the arrest was made yesterday, and the attack was allegedly planned for today. But I think that this story will go away because of any potential breaks in the narrative, right? If the student was actually transgender identifying, if the student, regarded themselves as female or whatever, And the fact that it's not, a Second Amendment gun-toting white male, basically.
Yeah, if it was a white guy, oh man, we would be hearing about this nonstop. Let's just be honest here, especially if he had right-wing tendencies or was online. But a lot of these stories sadly get swept under the rug. A lot of these stories we never hear anything really about. And then the manifestos usually get hidden by the intel agencies, and there's a larger kind of cover-up effort here because there's a larger agenda meant to propel this larger kind of ideology rather than deal with the actual kind of severe consequences of it, which results in a severe mental health crisis, an issue that no one really wants to kind of delve into and talk about and fix. And the best way to fix it is to have an open and honest, fair dialogue about it. But we can't even have that still in this country. Hopefully that changes under the Trump administration, and it may already have, especially with now the Fed's actually doing something, stopping, intervening, instead of goading, baiting, and aiding and abetting these larger kind of horrible monsters out there.
Well, can I just add to what Luke just said? We need to have an honest conversation about mental health. Part of the problem is that people have different interpretations of what that means. Like the trans ideology in itself, you could argue is a mental health problem, but a lot of people don't see it that way. They look at it as just like, oh, it's your true identity. So we can't even come to agreement with that. So we've abandoned logic and natural law altogether, and then we're wondering, like, why is everything upside down? I mean, we're all doing our own thing,
right? I think it does show a sort of fracturing in society. I think that there are a lot of people who are searching for purpose and meaning, but are ultimately kind of driven by comparison to others, right? They're looking around and being like, well, that person has something I don't. This person seems like their life is easy. Like, you don't really know what's going on in someone else's life. And especially for teenagers, where that's part of sort of the social development, your awareness of where you stand socially, it can be warped really, unfortunately. You mentioned this earlier, Gothix, that a lot of times incidents like this, and again, thank God that this did not turn into any sort of actual act of violence, that there aren't any victims. But, these types of, the teenagers are obviously not okay, become a crusade against the Second Amendment. And it's used as a platform to call for gun regulations. I also wonder if you'll start seeing an increased call for regulations on social media, because on the one hand, it seems like progressives don't like it when parents are saying, I'm concerned about my kids' social media use. On the other hand, there are, like, the Buffalo school shooter, or not school shooter, the grocery store shooter. One of the things that came up repeatedly was conversations that he had online and exposure to violent video games. I mean, the violent video game rhetoric's been going back since the 90s. It seems like there's sort of a shift to blame it on the internet and maybe not look at our cultural issues.